Today you join me for another chapter of our book Cogheart from my car. So I'm going to carry on with our story. We join Robert, who has arrived at Lily's house, and we'll see how their first interaction goes. So chapter 11. Robert had walked the length of the snowy driveway and was stopped a good 8 feet from the house, gazing up at it and wondering whether to try the servants' entrance or the front door, when he heard a loud whistle from above. He blinked and stared up at a tearful-looking red-headed girl, gazing out of a high window. The girl took her fingers from her mouth and called down to him, her voice carrying over the soft, silent landscape. Friend or foe? Robert considered this. Friend, I think. Who are you looking for? Miss Hartman. The girl smiled wearily. That's me! He felt a twinge of relief. May we speak? He asked. I've a message for you. If you wait there, she said, I shall endeavour to come down. He watched her push open the casement window and climb out. She edged along a shelf of bricks, clinging carefully to the window frame. As she jumped down onto the corner of the porch roof, her feet slipped on the frozen tiles, but she managed to right herself before she dropped over the roof's edge and shimmied down a drain pipe. When her feet reached the handrail, she grabbed an upright post covered in dead creepers and jumped down, tumbling into a drift of snow. Blimey, Miss Hartman, Robert said. You're a good mountaineer. Call me Lily, please. Lily picked herself up and dusted off the snowflakes, shivering as she did so, for she was wearing only a thin dress. Climbing's fine, she said. It's the falling I'm not used to. Normally I'd use the stairs, but I was imprisoned and my hairpins broke when I tried to pick the lock. Robert opened his mouth to attempt a reply, but couldn't think of anything. Who are you? Lily asked. And what's this about? She folded her goose-pimpled arms. Now that he saw her up close, Robert felt unaccountably nervous. She'd a friendly face, with cheeks rosy from the cold, and her upturned nose was lightly dusted with freckles. Beneath her fringe of wavy copper hair, her green eyes looked filled with sadness, and Robert wished with all his heart he could find something to say to make it vanish. I'm Robert Townsend, he mumbled. Apprentice clockmaker in the village up the way. His gloved hands twisted together, and he found himself staring. He'd planned his words carefully as he walked up the drive, but now, somehow, he'd forgotten them all. Da used to wind the clocks here. It was the only thing he could think of. For your father. Did you want to speak to me about that? Lily asked. Robert fiddled with the brim of his cap. He felt the tips of his ears burn. How could he be so stupid? Her father was missing. That's why the mech fox had wanted him to come in the first place. No, he said at last. I think of something that belongs to you. At least, he claims he does. Oh. Is it Captain Springer? Or one of the others? He's called Malkin. Malkin's alive! Lily exclaimed. A glimmer of hope sparked inside her. Does he have news of Papa? Not exactly, Robert murmured. He said I had to give you a message. He would have come himself, only he was shot. Shot? Her eyes widened in alarm. Don't worry, he's fine. Ticking over. Me and Da fixed his leg, the damaged part, I mean, and he's going to be right as rain. He's got a strong constitution. That one. Insides of steel. How do you own such an amazing mech, anyway? My father made him for me. I wish I could have taken him to school, but there were no pets allowed. Lily jiggled from foot to foot with impatience. Or was it the cold? Please, she said, tell me what it is. He nodded. When Malkin came round, he told me to tell you. The secret's in the safe. Lily clapped her hands together. The box! I knew it! He wants me to bring the box. Perhaps he has the key. She took Robert by the hand. Come on, she said. We'll go get it. They were walking towards the front door when a black steam wagon pulled in through the gates at the far end of the drive. Puffs of acrid smoke drifted from its chimney stack as it drove towards them. Lily gasped and clasped his hand tighter. What is it? He asked. That vehicle was here last night. She dragged him behind a snow-covered fir tree. You mustn't let them see me. They watched through the branches as the steam wagon stopped in front of the main entrance. 2 men got out of the driver's compartment. Their mirrored eyes glinted as they climbed the porch steps. One rapped on the front door with the handle of his walking stick. Then they waited. "Those men were in the village chasing Malkin," Robert said. "They're hybrids, part human, part mech. All bad news." "I know," Lily said. She pointed a shaking finger at Roach. "The thin one, Mr. Roach, he was on the commuter's ep with us, and last night I think they took Mrs. Rust and Papa's mechanicals away." Robert gave a shudder. "I know him too. He came into the shop. He's dangerous. And the other one too, Mr. Mould. You oughtn't go in there." "I've got to get the box." Lily brushed back her fringe and a fierce look came over her face. "I'm sure that's what they're after, so we can't leave without it." They crept round the side of the house, the snow crunching beneath their feet. Through a window, Robert glimpsed a drawing room. Then the door opened and a woman dressed in black showed Roach and Mould in. "That's my guardian, Madame Verdigris," Lily whispered. "She's in on whatever they're up to." And indeed, even at this distance, Robert could tell from the woman's posture that she wasn't at all surprised to see the two men. It was as if they were old friends. Robert and Lily ducked away from the window and peered around a corner of an ivy-encrusted trellis. The back door looked clear. They dashed towards it, and Lily tried the handle. Locked. She prized open an adjacent window and climbed through, beckoning him to follow. They were in a narrow corridor. Lily grasped a brass doorknob set into a papered wall and opened a disguised door to reveal a narrow servants' staircase. "This way," she said. Robert followed her up to a first floor and past several rooms along a dark landing before she paused outside a door. "Aha!" she said. "That witch left the key in it. Probably why I couldn't get out this way." She unlocked the door and stepped into a room filled with a mess of clothes and books. Robert crowded in behind her, peering over her shoulder at the rows of gruesome Penny Dreadful covers pinned to yellow wallpaper. A few had been hand-tinted with watercolours. Varney the Vampire, in particular, featured a lot of hand-painted red. "Wait here," Lily said, and she crawled under her bed and prized up a loose floorboard. Then she reached into the gap beneath it and pulled out a square rosewood box. She placed the box on a blanket in the centre of the bed. "There," she said, folding the corners of the blanket over the box's lid and knotting them tightly together. "That'll do." Robert flinched. He heard the tap-tap-tap of a cane and the creak of heavy boots. He peered round the door jamb. 3 shadowy fingers were ascending what must have been the main staircase to the landing. "They're coming," he whispered. Lily stepped towards the open window. "We have to climb down." "I can't." The words felt dry in his throat. "Why not?" "I'm afraid of heights." "Oh." She opened the wardrobe and stuffed her bundle inside. "Then we'll have to hide." "I shouldn't get in there either. I've an allergy to dust." "Never mind that now." Lily pushed back a row of dresses on hangers and an old tattered parasol and crammed him into the wardrobe. Then she took a last look around the room. "Professor Silverfish's card," she exclaimed, and she snatched a square of paper from her bedside table, then jumped in beside him, pulling the wardrobe door shut just as Madame, Roach and Mould arrived. "Where is she?" Mr. Roach glanced about, the room swooshing past in his reflective lenses. Robert peered over Lily's shoulder through the crack in the door. The dust in the wardrobe was making his eyes run and his nose itch. He dearly wanted to sneeze. He covered his mouth with a hand and watched as Lily's guardian stepped over to open the door. "But I can't understand it." Madame's reply was strained. "I locked her in." Mr. Roach leaned on his cane and crouched to examine the broken hairpins on the floor. "She must have used these to pick the lock," he said. "She hasn't got far. I'd say she's still in the house." He gathered the broken pins in his hand. "You knew we were coming, Madame Hortense. I warned you not to let Lily out of your sight." "But I've been busy." "Not busy enough by the looks of things. Pack a case for her. We'll search the rest of the house. Mr. Mould, come with me." The two men marched off down the passage. Lily and Robert kept as still as they could, hiding behind the rows of clothes. But when Madame opened the wardrobe, dust seemed to whoosh up Robert's nose with a sudden light and... "Achoo! Mon Dieu!" Madame screamed, grabbing at them. "She's here!" His eyes streaming, Robert pulled the old parasol from the back of the cupboard and hit the woman with it, tipping her into the wardrobe. Lily wrested herself free, dragging the bundle along with her. "Come on!" she cried, and they scrambled through the door and shut it behind them. Robert turned the key in the lock, trapping Madame inside. They ran along the landing towards the main stairs, but Roach and Mould were rushing upwards to meet them, their mirrored eyes gleaming. Lily hugged her bundle to her chest and darted the other way. Robert scrambled to follow. When they reached the far end of the mezzanine, they clattered through another disguised door and back down the narrow servant staircase to the ground floor. The hall was empty. As they slipped out the same window they'd come in by, they heard the men running around upstairs, searching for the hidden door. They ran across the garden, Lily throwing glances behind her. Skirting the edge of the lawn, they ducked behind a snow-covered pile of compost and stopped. Lily caught her breath and adjusted the bundle under her arm. "We'll be safe here for a moment," she said, brushing her fringe from her face. "I'm going to have to trust you. I hope you're telling me the truth." Robert nodded. The smell of rotting food was making him queasy. Or was it the running? "You can trust me," he said. "Good." She gave a sniff. "This isn't the way I wanted to leave, with so much undone, but I can't go back now, not when everyone wants to cause me harm." They set off again, heading down the incline of the garden. They were halfway down some stone steps when they caught sight of a third man waiting in the bare rose garden at the bottom. Lily turned and took Robert back along the balustrade, down an icy slope, through a flower bed filled with thorny stems, between a pair of trees and along the drive towards the manor's entrance. "Damn it!" The steam wagon had been moved across the driveway, blocking the gates. She grasped Robert's hand and they sprinted along the base of the boundary wall. Lily found a broken planter which had fallen from atop a pillar and clambered onto it. She rested the bundle on top of the snowy wall and climbed up beside it. Robert gulped. "I hate heights, remember? It's only a few feet." Lily pushed the bundle over the top to land safely in the snow on the other side before jumping down beside it. Shakily, Robert pulled himself up. The ice flakes wet his gloves and made them slippery as he climbed up onto the parapet and hung from the far side. "Now let's go," Lily said. He let his feet dangle, kicking against the frozen bricks before he dropped and rolled to the ground. He picked himself up and dusted the snow from his breeches. Lily swung the bundle over her shoulder. "Come on," she said, and ran off through the deep drifts. If you want the village," he called after her. "It's more to the west. That way." As they stole across the countryside towards Townsend's horologists, the sky darkened and a heavy snowfall began, the flakes settling on their clothes and soaking through to their skin. Robert led the way, taking Lily round the edge of the village to come in via the north lanes, all the time keeping an eye out for the men. He'd a horrible feeling they were watching everything he did, and at any moment might jump out from behind a hedge and grab Lily and her bundle before he'd time to stop them. When they'd crossed the green and passed the village chapel, he allowed himself the briefest flicker of a smile. "Everything's going to work out fine now, miss," he said, keeping his voice bright. "Not long now, and we'll be safe at my shop." They reached the top of Bridge Road, and he sighed with relief at the familiar snow-covered street. They'd made it without encountering anyone. But when they crossed the brow of the hill, things seemed distinctly less rosy. 15 feet ahead, leaning against his parked steam wagon, his face hidden under the dark canopy of a bat-like umbrella, was the orangutan shape of Mr. Mould. And with him, leaning on his walking cane, was the knife-thin silhouette of Mr. Roach. The pair were huddled in conversation. Lily's face paled. She shivered and clutched the bundle to her chest. "They're here," she said. Robert's breath caught in his throat. Just then Mould's cigar went out. He took out a lucifer, turned away, and striking it, held the flickering flame to the cigar's tip. His fat cheeks glowed with its fiery red sheen. Roach watched, his mirrored eyes shining orange in the shadowy sockets of his face. He was waiting to finish whatever it was he had been saying, and both men were so intent on Mould's task that they failed to notice Robert and Lily at the far end of the street. "Quick," Robert spluttered. "This way." He grasped Lily's hand and pulled her down a side alley. They stopped behind a whitewashed gable wall. Meltwater dripped onto Robert's cap from the snow-frost eaves of the cottage. Lily dropped her bundle between her feet and hugged her arms. "I thought we'd lost them," she said. "What are we going to do?" "Give me a moment," Robert replied. "I'll think of something." He tried, but he couldn't. and the red glowing vision of the men hung about in the dark, filling him with a feeling of despair. "Is there any other way into the shop?" Lily asked. "If you go to the end here," he said, "there's a path leads back onto the road further down. From there you can cross over and sneak through the gate into the backyard." "Then let's do that," Lily said. "You can't, not without... they'd see us." Robert stepped away from her and headed back towards the mouth of the alley. "What are you doing?" Lily asked. He gulped and gestured at the street. "I'm going to go out there and distract them so you can get past. When I'm shot of them both, I'll go in the shop and let you in the back door." Lily nodded. "Very well, but be careful." "And you," he said briskly, trying not to let the fear show in his voice. His mouth dry and heart beating hard in his chest, Robert strolled out onto Bridge Road. He took off his flat cap and stuffed it into his pocket. When he glanced back, Lily was edging towards the far end of the alley. He sauntered along the street, approaching the men, listening to the crunch of the melting snow underfoot and trying to seem as calm as possible. When he was sure they'd seen him, he did a double take and turned smartly on his heels, and as he'd hoped, they rushed to follow. Mr. Mould grabbed Robert's shoulder and spun him round. "Master Townsend, so glad we've bumped into you. I was having a word with my colleague Mr. Roach about our encounter the other day, where you sent me off on a wild goose chase." Robert shrugged. "Don't know what you mean?" "Oh, I think you do." Mr. Mould frowned and leaned towards him, and Robert's face grew big and distorted in his mirror's sockets. "Tell you what, son, Mr. Roach and I are on important business, looking for a lost soul, and your little misdirection prank cost us." "And didn't we see you at the big house earlier?" Mr. Roach added. "You were wearing a cap." Robert shook his head. "House? What house? And what would you characters want with a runaway girl?" Mr. Roach pounced on this. "I don't believe he mentioned we were looking for a girl." Robert gulped. Your colleague did a moment ago." "I find that unlikely," Mr. Roach said, but he wasn't sure. He turned to his mutton-chopped companion. "Mr. Mould, did you say a girl?" Mr. Mould scratched his head. "I said soul." "Oh, I must have misheard." In the corner of his vision, he noticed his da watching from the shop window. Then he caught a fleeting glimpse of Lily, with her bundle running across the road to head down the alley beside the shop, and under his breath, he let out a sigh of relief. "What are you looking at?" Mr. Roach asked suddenly. "My da," Robert said. "He's watching you, so you'd best let go of my arm." Mr. Mould released his iron grip and made a pretence of brushing some dust off Robert's jacket. "Remember, son, we've got our eyes on you." Mr. Roach tapped the bare metal in his raw eye socket with one finger. "All 4 of them." He prodded his companion on the shoulder with the handle of his stick, and the two of them walked back to their vehicle. The engine growled, and as they got in, a sputter of steam spurted from the chimney. They didn't drive off straight away, and Robert wondered if they were watching him through the tinted glass windscreen. He tried to ignore the panic that rose inside, telling him to run, and instead walked calmly back to the shop. When he opened the door, he found his da standing by the window, twisting the thin frames of his glasses between his fingers. "Where were you, Robert?" he asked. "You've been gone hours." "I went for a wander," Robert explained. Distractedly, he watched the men's vehicle drive off down the street. When all that was left of it was thin wheel tracks in the snow, he bolted the shop door and locked it with the key. "Who are those fellows?" Thaddeus asked. "The large one came in to ask after you." "Never mind that," Robert said. "There's someone out back I want you to meet." "Who the devil have you brought now?" Thaddeus demanded. Robert led his da through the rag curtain. At the end of the passage, he slipped the deadbolt on the back door and pulled it open. Lily waited nervously on the steps outside, clasping her bundle in her shivering arms, her red hair filled with melting snowflakes. "This," said Robert, "is Miss Lily Hartman, and she needs our help."